The air in our childhood home always carried the faint, sweet scent of my mother's gardenias, a smell she loved so much she planted them right outside the living room window. Even now, with the house feeling hollow and expectant, that perfume crept in through the slightly ajar window, a ghost of happier times. I, Lucas, stood by the mantelpiece, my fingers tracing the cool, smooth grain of the old oak. The fireplace was cold, but I could still feel the phantom warmth of 1,000 family nights, the crackle and pop of burning logs, the sound of my father's laughter echoing from a time before the sickness stole his voice and his strength. My brother, Ethan, paced near the large leather armchair our dad used to command. The rhythmic thud of his expensive Italian loafers on the Persian rug was a sharp, impatient counterpoint to the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I could feel the nervous energy radiating off him, a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. He kept running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture I knew meant he was either anxious or lying. Today, I feared it was both. "The lawyer should be here any minute," Ethan said, his voice too loud, too bright for the somber room. "Finally, we can put all this to rest." I just nodded, my throat tight. My wife, Sarah, stood beside me, her hand finding mine. Her touch was warm and steady, a small anchor in the turbulent sea of this day. She squeezed my fingers, and I could smell the faint, clean scent of her shampoo, a familiar comfort. Our daughter, Chloe, only 7 years old, was playing quietly on the floor with her doll, humming a tuneless little song, completely unaware of the storm gathering around us. The doorbell chimed, a deep, resonant gong that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. A moment later, Maria, who had been our housekeeper since Ethan and I were boys, ushered in Mr. Alastair Finch, the family lawyer. He was a tall, gaunt man with a perpetually serious expression, dressed in a dark suit that seemed to absorb the afternoon light filtering through the bay window. He carried a thick, tan-colored envelope, and the sight of it made my heart thump heavily against my ribs. "Lucas, Ethan," Mr. Finch greeted us, his voice a dry, precise instrument. He nodded to Sarah. He didn't smile. He settled himself in a straight-back chair, placing the envelope on the low coffee table between us. The scent of his old leather briefcase mixed with the gardenias, creating a strange, funereal bouquet. "We are here today to execute the last will and testament of Robert Michael Carter," he began, his words formal and heavy. He put on a pair of wire-rimmed glasses and carefully opened the envelope. The sound of the paper tearing was unnaturally loud. I held my breath. My father had always been a fair man, a man of principle. He'd built his construction business from nothing, his hands calloused and his back sore from decades of labor. He'd loved both his sons, though we were as different as sun and moon. I'd followed him into the business, learning the trade from the ground up, feeling the grit of concrete and the heft of a hammer. Ethan had chosen finance, his world one of screens and numbers, of sharp deals and faster profits. There had been tensions. Especially in these last few years, as Dad's health failed and Ethan's visits became less about family and more about finances. Mr. Finch cleared his throat. The light from the window caught the page, making the typed words look stark and final. "I, Robert Michael Carter, being of sound mind and body." The will was straightforward at first. Small bequests to Maria, to a few longtime employees, a donation to the local hospital. Then he came to the heart of it. The business. The house. The investments. "To my eldest son, Lucas James Carter," Mr. Finch read, his voice devoid of inflection, "I bequeath the sum of $100,000. A silence descended, thick and suffocating. $100,000. It was a generous sum, yes, but it was a pittance compared to the whole. The business alone was worth millions. The house, filled with a lifetime of memories, was priceless. I felt Sarah's hand tighten on mine, her nails digging into my palm. I could hear her sharp, indrawn breath. Mr. Finch continued, and his next words landed like a physical blow. "The remainder of my estate, including Carter Construction, all associated assets, my stock portfolio, and the primary residence at 2147 Maple Drive, I leave in its entirety to my younger son, Ethan Michael Carter." The world seemed to tilt. The familiar room swam before my eyes. The sweet smell of the gardenia suddenly felt cloying, nauseating. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears, a chaotic symphony of disbelief and betrayal. "What?" The word was torn from me, a raw, wounded sound. That can't be right." Ethan had stopped pacing. He stood by our father's chair, a look of somber satisfaction on his face. He didn't look surprised. Not at all. "I'm sorry, Lucas," he said, his voice dripping with a feigned sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Dad and we had many long talks towards the end. He saw things my way. He understood that my vision for the company, for the future, was the right one." "Your vision?" I shot back, my voice trembling. "Your vision is to strip the company for parts, to sell off the land he spent his life acquiring. He would never have agreed to that. He loved that business." People change, Lucas, Ethan said, his gaze cool. He saw that sentimentality doesn't pay the bills. He wanted the family legacy to be one of growth, of real wealth. Mr. Finch watched us over the rim of his glasses, his expression unreadable. He slid a copy of the will across the table towards me. My eyes scanned the document, landing on the signature at the bottom. It was my father's. I'd seen it 1,000 times on paychecks, on birthday cards, on building blueprints. The familiar, looping R of Robert, the strong, decisive slant. It looked right. But the words it validated felt so profoundly wrong. This is a mistake, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy grief. He wouldn't do this. But the document said otherwise. The law, it seemed, said otherwise. As Mr. Finch gathered his papers and made his exit, the weight of the new reality crushed down upon me. Ethan was now the master of this house, the owner of my father's life's work. And I was left with a consolation prize and a heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Sarah put her arms around me, her body warm and shaking with silent sobs. Chloe, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, looked up from her doll, her big blue eyes wide with confusion. Daddy? Why are you sad? I couldn't answer her. I could only watch as Ethan walked over to our father's armchair and sat down, spreading his arms along the worn leather rests, a king claiming his throne. The scent of his cologne, sharp and expensive, now overpowered the gentle fragrance of my mother's gardenias. Continua a história. The weeks that followed were a blur of gray, pain-soaked days. The $100,000 felt like blood money, a token payment that sealed my exile from my own history. Sarah and I rented a small apartment on the other side of town, the rooms cramped and smelling of stale carpet and other people's lives. The sounds of the city were a constant, intrusive hum through the thin walls, a far cry from the quiet, leafy street I had called home. Every morning, I woke with a leaden weight in my chest, the memory of the reading of the will the first thing to flood my mind, a bitter tide. I tried to go back to work at Carter Construction. It was all I knew. But the moment I stepped onto the site, the familiar smell of sawdust and fresh concrete now laced with the acrid tang of betrayal, I was met by a foreman named Ben, a man who had worked with my dad for 30 years. His face, weathered and kind, was etched with deep sympathy. Lucas, I'm so sorry, he said, his voice a low rumble. But Ethan, the new boss, he said you're not to be on company property anymore. He sent over new security protocols. I felt the world tilt again. He what? I'm sorry, son, Ben repeated, shaking his head. It's not right. None of this is right. Your dad, he talked about you taking over until the very end. He was so proud of the man you'd become. His words were both a balm and a poison. They confirmed what I already knew in my soul, but they also sharpened the agony of the injustice. I drove away from the site, the steering wheel cold and hard beneath my trembling hands, the vision of my future dissolving like mist. The final, brutal blow came a month later. A formal letter arrived, typed on crisp, expensive stationery with the new Carter Holdings letterhead. It gave us 30 days to remove all our personal belongings from the house on Maple Drive. Ethan was repurposing the property. He was selling it. The home where Sarah and I had been married in the backyard, where Chloe had taken her first steps, where the ghost of my father's laughter still lived in every room, was to be liquidated. The day we went to pack was overcast, the sky a sheet of dull gray, the air thick with the promise of rain. The house felt different, hollowed out. Many of the furniture pieces were already gone, sold or moved. The air no longer smelled of gardenias and old books, it smelled of dust and emptiness. We moved through the rooms like ghosts, packing a lifetime into cardboard boxes. I was in the attic, a place that always held the heat of the day and the faint, dry scent of forgotten things, when I found it. Tucked inside my old college trunk, beneath a stack of yellowed textbooks and a varsity jacket that still carried a whisper of youthful ambition, was a small, fireproof lockbox. It wasn't the one my father kept in his office downstairs. This one was older, its black paint chipped at the corners. I'd forgotten it existed. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm. I knew the combination, it was my mother's birthday. With fingers that felt thick and clumsy, I dialed the numbers. The latch clicked open. Inside, there were no stacks of money or glittering jewels. There were memories. My parents' marriage certificate. My mother's delicate gold locket. And nestled beneath a bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon, was my father's personal journal. It was a simple, leather-bound book, its cover soft and worn from years of handling. I sank down onto the dusty floorboards, the cold seeping through my jeans. I opened the journal. His handwriting, the same as the one on the will, filled the pages. It was a chronicle of his thoughts, his fears, his hopes. I flipped towards the end, my breath catching in my throat. The entries from his final months were heartbreaking. He wrote of his pain, his frustration at his failing body. He wrote of his love for his family. And he wrote of Ethan. October 12, the entry began. Ethan came by again today. All he talks about is the true value of the company. He says Lucas is too soft, too much like me, that he'll never make the hard decisions. He pushed me again to sign those new partnership papers he had drawn up. I told him no. Again. The business is for both my boys. It's their legacy, not a stock to be traded. He left in a rage. I don't like the man he's becoming. The greed in his eyes, it frightens me. I turned the page, my hands shaking so badly the paper rustled like dead leaves. November 3rd. I'm so tired. The medicine makes my mind foggy. Ethan was here, so helpful, so concerned. He brought a new will for me to sign. He said it was just a simple update, that his lawyer said it was necessary. I was so out of it, the words on the page were swimming. I didn't sign it. I told him I wanted my own lawyer, Alastair Finch, to look at it first. He was not happy. He took the document and left. I must remember to call Alastair tomorrow, But the next entry, dated just a week later, was different. The handwriting, usually so strong and steady, was a shaky, wavering scrawl. November 10th. I can barely hold this pen. The doctor says it's the new medication. Ethan is here every day. He's so attentive. He says he's protecting my interests. He had another document today. A new will. He said it was the same one, just cleaned up. My eyes won't focus. He's my son. I have to trust him. He's putting the pen in my hand, The entry ended there, mid-sentence. A dark, blurry smudge of ink marred the bottom of the page, as if the pen had fallen from a limp hand. I sat there in the dusty, silent attic, the journal heavy in my lap. The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying, crystalline clarity. The fogging medication. The pressured visits. The forged signature on a document my father was too weak and too trusting to properly comprehend. Ethan hadn't just manipulated our father, he had exploited his vulnerability, his trust, in his most fragile moments. He had guided a dying man's hand to steal a legacy. A cold, hard fury, purer and more focused than any I had ever known, ignited within me. This was no longer just about money or a house. This was about justice. I carefully placed the journal back in the lockbox and carried it down from the attic as if it were made of glass. I found Sarah in our old bedroom, carefully wrapping china in newspaper. I didn't need to say a word. She took one look at my face, at the grim determination in my eyes and the protective way I held the box, and she knew. "What is it, Lucas?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We're not giving up," I said, my own voice low and steady. "He stole it, Sarah. All of it. And I have the proof." The rain finally began to fall, tapping gently against the window panes of the house that was no longer ours, washing the world clean. But for me, the storm was just beginning. Continua a história. The office of Attorney Gabriel Reyes smelled of strong coffee, old books, and a faint, clean hint of lemon polish. It was a world away from Alastair Finch's sterile, traditional space. Reyes was a compact man with intense, dark eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for being a pit bull in probate court. I sat across from him, the lockbox open on his massive oak desk. Sarah was beside me, her presence a steadying warmth. I told him everything. The will. Ethan's behavior. The journal. I watched as Reyes read the crucial entries, his expression growing grimmer with each line. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "This is compelling," he said, tapping a finger on the journal. "It establishes motive, opportunity, and it directly calls into question your father's testamentary capacity and the issue of undue influence on those specific dates. The shaky handwriting, the mention of medication, it paints a very damning picture." "So we can fight it?" I asked, hope a fragile bird fluttering in my chest. "We can fight it," Reyes confirmed, his voice firm. "But it won't be easy. Ethan has the signed will. He has the law, on its face, on his side. We'll have to prove fraud. We'll need to depose the doctor about your father's medication and mental state. We'll need a handwriting expert to analyze this journal and the signature on the will. And we'll have to subpoena Ethan. He's not going to give up his prize without a vicious fight." "I don't care about the fight," I said, the image of my father's wavering handwriting burned into my mind. "I care about the truth." Reyes gave a sharp, approving nod. "Good. Then let's go to war." The legal process was a slow, grinding machine. Summons were issued. Depositions were scheduled. The once private family conflict was about to become a matter of public record. The first major skirmish was the deposition of Dr. Evans, my father's oncologist. It took place in a conference room as sterile and cold as a hospital ward. Dr. Evans, a weary-looking man with kind eyes, confirmed under oath that the medication my father was on in his final weeks could cause severe confusion, drowsiness, and an inability to concentrate or comprehend complex documents. "In your medical opinion," Reyes asked, his voice calm but relentless. Would Robert Carter have been of sound and disposing mind on or around November 10 to understand the nature and extent of his property, and the natural objects of his bounty, in order to make a radical and unexplained change to his last will and testament? Dr. Evans sighed, the sound heavy with professional regret. Based on the dosage levels recorded in his chart for that period, it is highly unlikely. He would have had periods of lucidity, but his cognitive function was significantly impaired. He was often disoriented and highly susceptible to suggestion. Each word from the doctor was a brick, building a wall of evidence against Ethan's lie. Next came the handwriting expert, a meticulous woman named Dr. Irene Vance. She spent hours with the journal and a copy of the disputed will, using magnifiers and specialized lighting. In her deposition, she was methodical and precise. The signature on the will dated November 11 is a forgery, she stated flatly. A skilled one, but a forgery nonetheless. The writer attempted to mimic the overall shape of Mr. Carter's signature, but they failed to replicate the specific pressure patterns, the fluidity of the line, and the subtle hesitations that are present in the genuine samples from his journal. The forger was trying to copy a signature, not write it naturally. The hand that signed this will was steady. The hand that wrote this journal entry was not. The most grueling day, however, was the deposition of Ethan himself. He arrived with his own high-priced attorney, a slick man named Thompson who oiled his way through the preliminaries. Ethan was dressed for success, his suit impeccable, his expression one of wounded indignation. For hours, Reyes laid the trap. He asked gentle questions at first, about Ethan's relationship with our father, about his visits, about his business discussions. Ethan was smooth, painting a picture of a devoted son having thoughtful, strategic conversations with a proud father. Then Reyes changed tack. His voice lost its softness, becoming a razor. Mr. Carter, let's talk about the document you presented to your father on or around October 12. The one he refused to sign. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't recall a specific document. You don't recall the partnership papers that would have given you controlling interest in Carter Construction? Reyes asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. The ones your father wrote in his journal that you were pressuring him to sign? My father was confused, Ethan snapped. His journal ramblings aren't fact. Is it a fact that you visited him on November 10? I visited him often. And on that visit, did you present him with a new last will and testament? He asked me to bring it, Ethan said, his voice gaining a defensive edge. He had changed his mind. Did he? Reyes picked up a copy of the journal entry. He writes here, and I quote, he's putting the pen in my hand. That doesn't sound like a man executing his own wishes. That sounds like a man being guided. That's your interpretation, Thompson, Ethan's lawyer, interjected. Reyes ignored him, his gaze locked on my brother. Where is the original of the will you brought on November 10, Ethan? The one your father didn't sign. The one you took away with you. Ethan paled. I don't know. It was discarded. How convenient, Reyes said softly. He then entered into evidence the report from Dr. Vance. He slid a copy across the table to Ethan. This is the analysis from a court-appointed handwriting expert. She concludes the signature on the will you produced is a forgery. For the first time, the mask of arrogant confidence on Ethan's face cracked. A vein throbbed in his temple. His eyes, for a fleeting second, darted around the room like a trapped animal's. He could feel the walls closing in. That's a lie, he hissed. She's wrong. We'll see what a jury thinks, Reyes said, gathering his papers. We're done here. As we left the deposition, the air outside felt different. Lighter. The battle wasn't over, but we had drawn blood. We had the truth on our side, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I truly believed it would be enough. Continua a história. The day of the probate hearing arrived, cloaked in a fine, misty rain that blurred the windows of the county courthouse. The building was an imposing edifice of gray stone, its halls echoing with the ghosts of 1,000 past conflicts. The air inside was cool and carried the scent of floor wax, old paper, and damp wool from the coats of the people milling about. The courtroom itself was a solemn, wood-paneled space. The judge's bench, a vast fortress of dark mahogany, dominated the room. The spectator benches were hard and unforgiving. Sarah and I sat at the plaintiff's table with Gabriel Reyes. He was a portrait of calm focus, his notes arranged in neat piles before him. I could feel the nervous energy thrumming through my own body, a live wire of anxiety and hope. I reached for Sarah's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. Ethan entered with his lawyer, Thompson. He walked with a stiff-backed arrogance, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the tight line of his mouth. He didn't look at me. He took his seat at the adjacent table, and the air between us grew cold and heavy. The door behind the bench opened, and everyone rose as Judge Margaret Williams entered. She was a woman in her late 60s, with a stern, intelligent face and sharp eyes that swept over the courtroom, missing nothing. Her black robe whispered of authority. She settled into her high-backed chair, and the bailiff called the court to order. The proceedings began with dry, legal formalities, but the atmosphere was charged, electric. Reyes stood to make his opening statement. He spoke not to the judge, but to the room, his voice clear and resonant. Your Honor, this is a case about betrayal. It is about the exploitation of a dying man's trust by his own son. We will present clear and convincing evidence that the will propounded by Ethan Carter is a product of fraud and undue influence, that Robert Carter's true wishes, documented in his own hand, were to provide for both his sons equally. Then it was Thompson's turn. He painted a picture of a savvy businessman, Ethan, guiding his sentimental father towards a more profitable future. He called the journal entries the incoherent musings of a medicated mind and insisted the signature was genuine. The first witness was Dr. Evans. His testimony about my father's medical state was clinical and devastating. Under Reyes's careful questioning, he painted a vivid picture of a man trapped in a chemical fog, vulnerable and easily led. On cross-examination, Thompson tried to suggest that my father had moments of clarity, but Dr. Evans held firm. A moment of clarity is not the same as the sustained, lucid comprehension required to understand and execute a complex legal document that disinherits a beloved child, he stated, and his words hung in the air, simple and undeniable. Then, Reyes called Dr. Irene Vance to the stand. She was a superb witness, methodical and unflappable. She used large display boards to show the jury, and the judge, the magnified signatures. You see here, in the genuine sample from the journal, she said, using a laser pointer, the tremor, the variation in ink flow caused by the unsteady pressure of a sick man's hand. Now, look at the will signature. The line is confident, uniform. It's a practiced imitation. Notice the loop of the R here in the journal, it's weak, almost collapsing. On the will, it's flamboyant, overperformed. The forger was trying too hard. She dismantled Ethan's defense piece by piece, her expertise a cool, sharp scalpel. Thompson's cross-examination was aggressive but futile. He could not shake her. Her conclusions were based on science, not speculation. Finally, it was my turn to testify. As I walked to the witness stand, the wooden floor firm beneath my feet, I felt the weight of every eye in the room. I swore to tell the truth, my voice sounding strangely calm to my own ears. Reyes guided me through the story of my relationship with my father, our work together, his values. I spoke of the man who believed a handshake was a contract, who valued loyalty above profit. I described the last months, the heartbreaking decline. Then Reyes showed me the journal. Do you recognize this, Mr. Carter? Yes, I said, my throat tight. It's my father's personal journal. Can you read the entry dated November 10th for the court? I took a deep breath. The room was so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the overhead lights. I began to read my father's words, his voice from beyond the grave filling the silent courtroom. Asterisk, November 10th. I can barely hold this pen. The doctor says it's the new medication. Ethan is here every day. He's so attentive. He had another document today. A new will. My eyes won't focus. He's putting the pen in my hand, asterisk. My voice broke on the last few words. I looked up, directly at Ethan. He was staring at the table, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might snap. The emotion in the room was palpable, a thick, sorrowful haze. I had not just read words, I had let them all hear my father's fear, his helplessness. Thompson's cross-examination was a brutal attempt to paint me as a jealous, less successful brother, bitter about my father's supposed change of heart. He pushed and prodded, but I held fast. I simply told the truth. The truth, I was learning, was a fortress. The climax came when Reyes called Ethan back to the stand. This was not the controlled environment of the deposition. This was a public arena, under the gaze of a stern judge and a rapt audience. Reyes began calmly, revisiting old ground. Then he moved in for the kill. Mr. Carter, you testified that your father was of sound mind when he signed the will. Is that correct? Yes, Ethan said, his voice strained. You heard Dr. Evans's testimony that he was likely not. I disagree. You heard Dr. Vance testify that the signature is a forgery. She is mistaken. Reyes paused, letting the silence stretch. He picked up a single piece of paper from his table. I have here a subpoenaed record from a private courier service. It shows a package sent from your office to a post office box in Delaware, registered to a company called Document Solutions Incorporated. The date of this shipment is November 12th, 2 days after you allegedly helped your father sign this will. Can you tell the court what was in that package? Ethan froze. The color drained from his face. He looked at Thompson, who was frantically shuffling through his own papers. They had been caught completely off guard. Reyes had kept this piece of evidence hidden, a trump card for this exact moment. I don't recall, Ethan stammered. Allow me to refresh your memory, Reyes said, his voice like ice. Document Solutions Incorporated is a shell corporation. But through further subpoenas, we were able to trace its ownership to an acquaintance of yours from college, a man with a reputation for creative graphic design. The package you sent contained a digital copy of your father's genuine signature, didn't it? So your friend could create a high-quality forgery for you to trace onto the new will. The gasp in the courtroom was audible. Judge Williams leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. This is conjecture, Thompson shouted, objecting. But the damage was done. The lie had been unraveled in front of everyone. The public facade Ethan had so carefully constructed crumbled to dust right there in the wood-paneled room. His silence, his panicked expression, were more damning than any confession. Reyes didn't need to ask another question. He simply looked at the judge and said, "No further questions, Your Honor." The final arguments were a formality. Reyes spoke of honor, of family, of a father's true love being perverted by greed. Thompson sputtered about technicalities and lack of direct proof, but his words sounded hollow and desperate. Judge Williams did not retire to her chambers. She looked from me to Ethan, her expression one of profound disappointment and stern judgment. "The evidence in this case is clear, compelling, and deeply disturbing," she began, her voice ringing with authority. "This court finds that the document purported to be the last will and testament of Robert Michael Carter, dated November 11th, was procured by fraud and undue influence exercised by the beneficiary, Ethan Carter. The signature thereon is a forgery." She paused, letting the words sink in. I felt a sob catch in my throat. Sarah squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. "Therefore," the judge continued, her gaze fixed on Ethan, who seemed to have shrunk in his seat, "the court sets aside that document. The prior will, executed 5 years ago under the supervision of attorney Alastair Finch, is reinstated as the true and valid last will of Robert Carter." She then turned her attention directly to my brother. "Mr. Carter, the behavior exhibited in this courtroom is more than just a civil wrong, it is a profound moral failure. The court refers this matter to the district attorney's office for a criminal investigation into charges of forgery and fraud. Furthermore, as a personal sanction for this egregious abuse of the judicial process, you are ordered to pay all of your brother's legal fees in this proceeding, in addition to your own." It was over. The gavel fell with a sharp, final crack that echoed the breaking of my brother's deceit. The public victory was absolute. Ethan had not only lost, he had been exposed, humiliated, and now faced the very real prospect of losing his freedom. He stood up quickly, his face a mask of fury and shame, and almost fled the courtroom, pursued by the whispers and stares of the spectators. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, weary sadness. The victory was for my father, for his true wishes, for justice. But the cost was a brother I had once looked up to, now a stranger defined by his greed. As we walked out of the courthouse, the misty rain felt like a blessing on my face. The world, once so gray and hopeless, was vivid again. The sound of the city was the sound of life, of a future restored. Sarah hugged me tightly, and I breathed in the clean, rain-washed air, feeling the heavy weight of the past months finally, begin to lift. História finalizada.